We're getting into it. You know, today's not going to be nearly as long of a lesson as it typically is, which is about 45 minutes, I don't think. Mostly because we're finishing off what we were not able to do the first time to end out lesson 1. Next week, we start getting involved with the book of Genesis and start really getting into the meat of the biblical stories. But we've just been laying the groundwork pretty much in this class so far to kind of give us an understanding of how the Bible was formed, at least with the Old Testament, which is going to be our first focus, looks like. Does anybody remember in review how many parts there are, how many divisions to the Old Testament? 12 is the answer on the table. Does anyone agree or disagree? Divisions to the Old Testament. It is divided into a certain amount of categories of styles of writing. So we have a 12, we have a 4. How many 4s in the room? Okay, and I thought I saw 5s. How many 5s in the room? The 5s are correct. 5 divisions. I'd be super impressed if you could name them. Tell me what the 5 divisions are. Law, poetry, history. Star student. Very good. Awesome, awesome. And does anybody remember what we were last talking about? Main, minor prophets. So what we were what we were talking about are some interesting proofs that kind of flesh out why the Bible is true as a manuscript. We were talking about how it came to be, how it came to be formed, how it went from oral tradition into being in written form. And we were talking about archaeological, historical proofs, scientific, medicinal proofs in the Bible that seem to suggest that, God had his mind squared about how the world works long before humans discovered that information. That it's always been in his word. We just didn't always take it at face value that, the divine who created everything sort of knew what he was talking about. And so we left off, and I said that today we were going to focus in on Dead Sea Scrolls, which is another kind of proof. Now, I want to tell you the story of those. First of all, does anybody know about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Have any idea what they are? Anybody? So we got one who's like, yeah, absolutely. And so, Heidi, if you'd like to come up and teach this segment, you are so welcome to do that. I would welcome the break. No, I'm glad you know about it. Does anybody else? Dead Sea Scrolls. Dead Sea Scrolls. 2. Okay, cool. I love when information is going to be new to the students. That really excites me because I feel like then I'm able to give you a little tidbit that you can put in your toolbox and know for the future, because this is a term that's thrown around quite a bit. Think way back. Imagine it. It's the year AD 1008 AD. And there are these little Bedouin shepherd boys, and they've got these unruly goats. They're in this really barren pass near the Dead Sea. And they are trying to get these goats to Bethlehem because they're taking them to market to be sold. This is typical. There's nothing about the way the story starts that's in any way unusual for the time period or the place. But what ends up happening is one of the goats in the pack breaks off because goats are not known for being great followers. Okay? And this goat, he goes frolicking off into the mountains where it's very craggy and everything looks the same, and he just sort of blends into the landscape. And the boys, knowing that that goat represented money, wanted to find him. And so they're walking around these mountains, and there are these caverns that exist in these mountains, little depressions where it concaves in, and in theory one could explore those, but that wasn't what they were about. They were about finding this goat. Except that one of those young shepherd boys picked up a stone just to play around as he's running around trying to find this goat. And when he takes the stone, as he's passing by one of the caverns, he just takes the stone and tosses it in. That's it. Just a little boy thing to do, right? But when he tosses the stone into the cavern, he hears pottery break. And that stops him in his tracks, because that's not the sound you expect in a barren, lonely, desert-like mountain pass. You don't expect to hear shattering when you toss a rock into a cave. So the two of them turn aside, depart from this entire idea of trying to find this goat, and they go into the cavern. And when they get into the cavern, they realize the stone had struck a single pot, ancient pot of clay. In the ancient pot of clay, they found scrolls. Now, these scrolls were written on a variety of different kinds of materials. Some of them were on leather. Some of them were on ancient vellum and parchment. But one commonality they all had is that they were 1,900 years old at least, putting them before the time of Christ by hundreds of years. And they were, some of them, complete manuscripts of the ancient prophets. They are the earliest copies of biblical passages the world has ever seen to this day. And so, of course, they start searching the caverns. And as they search those caverns, they end up finding 11 other jars filled with almost the entirety of the Old Testament. As they pull out those jars, they begin to compare them to what they had as biblical manuscripts for that day, the year 1008 AD. And when they compare the manuscripts of 1008 AD to these scrolls, which dated back 1,900 other years, they found that they were word for word exactly the same, with a single exception. 2 words in all of the manuscripts had different vowels selected that never changed the meaning of the root word itself. I want you to think about that. Think about that. By pure chance, these are discovered. Now the question is, how in the world did they even exist? Now when they began to trace back what could have been the scribe roots, if you will, of who actually maintained these manuscripts, they attributed them to the Essenes. Has anybody ever heard of the Essenes? The Essenes. It's an ancient Jewish sect. Basically, they had lived in that area before the time of Christ, and somewhere around AD 70, they faced Roman invaders that drove them out of the area. So the Essenes, since they were scribes and scholars, and the protecting and preservation of these amazing and sacred texts of God's word was their primary purpose, they made sure that they took these jars and scuttled them away into these caves to protect them, knowing that by God's grace at some point they could be discovered. At the very least, they wouldn't fall into Romans' hands and be destroyed. So the Essenes, we have to really give them a nod and thank them for all of their tireless work as they tried to preserve these ancient texts. Yes? So they are the Bible. They literally are. So they are the major and minor prophets as well as the law. It was almost a perfect manuscript of the Old Testament that was discovered, as it would have been preserved all throughout Jewish history on scrolls independent of each other to be able to be rolled out and read aloud. So it's about 11 jars that were jam-packed full of these scrolls that were anything, like I said, from parchment to leather. Amazingly enough, generally speaking, despite the fact that a lot of them were on leather, they hadn't crumbled to the point of not being legible, which is even more of a blessing at that point, because they were able to vouch for the scholarship of them. So really exciting. If I recall right, one of them, which I believe was the book of Isaiah, was 24 feet long. 24 feet long, written out. Can you imagine? Yeah, 24 feet long. And think about it, because we had said that every 7 years, the law and the prophets were read aloud in the company of all the Jews. And so can you imagine them coming out with a 24-foot long manuscript, and they're slowly unraveling? I mean, you need help to just start rolling the other end, right? But this is what they had. This was the mechanism they had until we had that Gutenberg press. So just very cool information. To just kind of transition a little bit, I want to talk briefly, because I did say tonight was not going to be nearly as long. I want to talk briefly about some of the other things that sort of prove things out for us. Humans, in their base nature, are always curious about the future. When you were a child, I'm sure you were curious, what am I going to be when I grow up? Who am I, if you were so inclined, who am I going to marry? Will I have children? Will I not have children? Where will I live? Will I be a movie star or, drive a fancy car? I think we all think not only about our own future, but the future of the world, right? There's a natural curiosity in us. It's what we do. We're always thinking ahead, even if we're not necessarily living ahead. And it's cool because I feel like God, in his infinite wisdom, knowing the nature that we have, prepared for that in his word by giving us what I like to call little Easter eggs along the way. You know when you talk about a movie having Easter eggs, how they sort of plant something in the beginning that later on is going to come to pass, and it's sort of this little shadow of things to come. I think God did that all throughout the scripture, and what we called it is prophecy. And prophecy is this neat little tool because there are a lot of religious books in this world, and there are a lot of religious books that have attempted to shape out the future that so intrigues us. However, of the Jeopardy question of the day, how many, if you had to round it to its nearest whatever, I won't even say what type of decimal point, if you had to round it to its nearest whatever number, how many prophecies do you think exist in the Bible? Now, let me just qualify this, because we did say that the Bible has been written over time, and that some of the prophecies of the Bible that were prophecies to the writers many years before came to pass already. And so we're looking back at those. They were looking ahead to them. So if we were to encapsulate all prophecy, whether it's new or already past to us, how many prophecies, individual, do you think the Bible contains? Take a guess at a number. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so we have a 1,500 on the table, higher or lower? I feel like we're playing, what is that game? Higher or lower, and then you guess, and maybe you get the prize. Price is Right, is that what it is? Yeah, exactly, okay. So we have 1,500, how many do you say? 3,000, anybody else? How much? A lot. I can go with that. Let's quantify it a little better. A 1,500 or 3,000? In the whole. In the whole. 54,000. All right. Every other verse is a prophecy. No, that's cool. That's cool. 54,000? Okay. All right, we'll go with it. One more guess. One more guess. Okay. The answer is about 6,000. Okay. 6,000 forecasts. Forecasts of everything from political shifts, messianic promises, end times related stuff, battles and their outcomes, miracles that would occur, people who would be born, not just Christ. It's full of prophecy. And the thing about it is that we actually can look and will, in the course of this Bible study, look at examples of prophecies that have already been fulfilled. Truly, the Bible is not only one of the greatest evidences of early civilization genealogy, so looking back at people who already existed, it is also one of the greatest and most accurate manuscripts that shows things to come. Battles that actually occurred in history that were foretold of as much as 1,000 years before they happened, right down to citing the city and the outcome of what would occur. It's incredible how one could predict such things absent of God. Impossible. There have been plenty of prophets in the world over time that got some generalized things. But I want to give you guys some pretty cool factoids from my note takers. Did you know that during the life of Christ alone, how many years did Jesus live? 33. 33 years on earth. Do you know how many prophecies were fulfilled just in his 33 years on earth of the 6,000? That would be pretty rad. 333 to be exact. 333 in his 33 years. That's kind of cool, right? That'll be easy for you guys to remember. It's easy for me to remember. And about 29 of them, of those 333, were just related to his trial and death, and 29 of those scriptures were fulfilled in a single 24-hour period. 29. They were predicted hundreds, and in some cases, over 1,000 years before. I want to talk for a brief moment about statistics, because in order to really just put it in our minds in a way that I think is memorable, I'm going to read off something kind of cool to you. Does anybody know what the probability of being struck by lightning is? 1 in 700,000. That's impressive, right? Like, I feel somewhat safe in a rainstorm. Somewhat. If we start really thinking about that and multiplying that out, or I should say dividing that out by how many people on the earth, I might get somewhere about like 4,000 a year, and that now becomes scary, but all right. To be killed by lightning, though, struck by lightning is 1 in 700,000. Killed by lightning is 1 in 2 million. There's a reason I'm building towards this, because we deal with statistics every single day, and we hedge our bet on these kinds of things. I want to talk about statistics for a brief second, because when we get to the end of this, I want to actually show you the mathematics behind the probability of Jesus being Messiah predicted in the Bible. Becoming president, 1 in 10 million, based on who actually applies, who actually gets a chance at trying to politic for it, and who actually gets it. A meteorite landing in your house is 180 trillion. 1 in 180 trillion that you might have a meteorite of a tiny size hit your house. Okay? We're talking about staggering possibilities here, right? Okay. So check this out. Messiah. 333, we said, prophecies in his 33 years. I'm only going to focus on 8 of them. I'm not going to focus on all 333 of them. Let me just take 8 main ones. Book of Micah said the Christ was going to be born in Bethlehem. Book of Matthew confirms that. For a young man at that time to be born in Bethlehem would only be 1 in 280,000. Not too dramatic, right? Okay. For that person to have a forerunner, somebody who was a cousin that would be born and really like them and sing their praises, is about 1 in 1,000. Because there's a pretty good chance you might have a fan in your own family. So not too dramatic, right? Okay. For Christ to enter Jerusalem riding on a donkey, which was a main method of transportation, would be also about 1 in 100. There's a 1 in 100 chance that a dude might ride into Jerusalem on a donkey on that particular day. Many were. Nothing seems dramatic at this point. For this man to be betrayed by a friend is 1 in 1,000. For him to be betrayed for 30 exact pieces of silver, we're still looking at 1 in 1,000. For those 30 pieces of silver to go to buying a particular field, that would be used as a funeral plot is 1 in 100,000. For that person to be taken to jail, be innocent, and not choose to defend themselves is 1 in 1,000. For that person to be crucified at that time under Roman rule is 1 in 10,000. When you actually take all of the probabilities, you're looking at 10 to the 28th power, which actually works out to being a literal 1 in 10 sextillion. That's the decimal points you get at that juncture. To count that out, you are looking at 1 in 10, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27 zeros after that. 10 with 27 zeros after that. That one person would do all 8 of those things at that exact time. That's 8 out of 333 prophecies that we can correlate in totally different periods of time, written by people from different geographical locations, different cultures, different societal statuses. We are talking about something extraordinary, something that history correlates. This sacred text that we are going to embark on, actually starting in the book of Genesis next week, is telling a story whose probability is so finite that it blows the mind it happened. And yet, it did. And yet, it still does. Thank you, God, for creating a book that we could trust in, for preserving it all throughout time. We talked about the fact that they tried to burn it. They tried to ban it. Governments have tried to push it out. We have missionaries right now. The missionaries who came here that we all know about that are ministering in the Middle East, they literally are just a blackened silhouette on their missionary card because it's not even safe for their faces to be seen, for their likeness to be anywhere on the internet. They cannot have Facebook. They cannot have any social media whatsoever because of the great danger, and yet the gospel's being preached in places where it's forbidden. This book is landing in hands that should never have it, according to their leadership and their governing bodies. We're talking about a book that can't be stamped out, burned out, canceled out in any way. It has existed for a very long time. And after you and I, it will exist for as long as the Lord himself tarries. This book is precious. It is life-giving. It is provable fact. History shows it. Medicine shows it. Everything shows it. We talked about the archaeological evidences. It is beyond compare. And as I've told you before, I've taught Bible studies now 24 years. And in 24 years, every single time I swing through a Bible study and I'm told, but what about all the contradictions? I've yet to find a person who can name one that stands up. It is without controversy. It is perfection. It's God-breathed. That's literally what it says with the God inspiration. It's saying that God literally breathed this into other people. And so I thank God for his book. Next week, when we get into it, I told you, we're only at about the 30-minute mark at most. Next week, we're going to start with the book of Genesis. And we're really going to just dig in and start looking at how the world began, what that means, what those days mean, time itself. We'll explore some cool things. I'll put some bugs in your ear. Here are my Easter eggs for you. Do yourself a favor, look up canopy theory. Canopy theory. That's for when we get closer to Noah. That's kind of fun. We'll look at some science. We'll look at some arts. We'll look at some history. We'll do it all because that's what we do here in Search for Truth, because truth is found in his word, but there is also truth that surrounds us in the world that affirms him and his existence in the world that he created. Amen. So, sorry to disappoint by not giving you 15 more minutes. If you want me to blather on, I could do a little song and dance. I could do some things, but I'll stop instead and not subject you to that. Any questions, thoughts, anything? guys good? Huh? What was that? And hopefully I have an answer, but I never guarantee that. It is. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. We, those who were in the class prior, know that we end talking about the entirety of Revelation in the sense of all the major parts of it, all the major components that are easy to correlate with other scriptures. And we theorize about the rest because some of it is still cloaked for us right now. Not all of it has been revealed entirely. There have been people who over time have made predictions based on what they see. 99 Reasons, the Lord is Coming Back in 1999, and all those other things. And I'm sort of like, I miss it. Oh, man. But it's one of those things where I believe so strongly that we are right now in a generation that is rife with fear and uncertainty, a confused generation that has no sense of identity. We are living in a time in which people are groping in the darkness. And as it was in the days of Noah, it is here in the end that they are blindly leading themselves into revelry and anything they can do to just kind of swallow and drown out the chaos that's actually happening in their world and in their mind. And I think that I absolutely agree with that idea that prophecy is a powerful tool in the hands of a New Testament Christian that is full of the Spirit and discernment and can help not to just facilitate fear, but present the Comforter, the one who is able to actually vanquish the anxiety that is sure to happen in dark times. And that is literally the point of prophecy. The point of prophecy is to preach Christ and Him crucified. That's literally the point of prophecy, to say, I am giving you a clue of what is to come so you can trust that I see ahead and I've got you. And I have a plan for you to be able to get you through whatever portion of that we actually do have to live through, which is always up for debate. But that being said, it's true. I appreciate your comments. I do. Anybody else before we close in prayer? We good? All right. Would anybody like to pray for the closing of our time? This is always the point where the Jeopardy music plays. Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. Come on. Oh, my Lord. That's good.